Second question, out of all your years in tennis, who's the best player you've ever seen play on tour and why?
I mean, I think I would have to answer this generationally because in every era you have a standout player who is amazing, and you can't really compare eras, because my honest belief is a champion in one era would be a champion in another, because by their nature they adapt, and whatever environment they're in, they would find a way to be a champion. Welcome back, Nick, and this is the fun time. It's your chance to put me in the hot seat, and you've been very kind to give me forewarning of some of the questions, which is great. So go ahead and fire away.
Well, I thought it'd be a bit cruel. You sent my questions ahead, so
Yeah.
I thought it was only fair that I'd do the same. But okay, so here we go. Here's my 4 questions to you, Dave. So first of all, and again, aligning it with business and sport, what methods do you use to prepare players for high pressure moments, and which apply to business executives before big presentations or negotiations?
Yeah, I think the first thing is a little story I want to tell you called The Billionaire's Dream. And I remember Samantha Murray, also from Manchester, who had to play Sharapova on court 1, and taking her walkie on court 1, early in the morning before the match, no crowd there, and that, just to soak in the atmosphere. She hadn't played on a court that big before, and just saying to her, because she was very, very nervous, listen, you've earned the right to be here. And what you're about to do is something that, billionaires would gladly pay millions and millions to experience, but they can't. You have to earn the right to be here, on merit. And the only thing they can do is pay a lot of money to simulate something like this, but they can never experience the real thing. So what you're about to do is the privilege, and you've worked hard all your career to get to this place. The last thing you want to do is walk off of that court and not remember it. Because from my own experience, playing on a big court for the first time, I froze, and I really played a match in a daze, and I hardly remember, other than wanting the court to swallow me up. Yeah. So I didn't enjoy any of it, but I had no one advising me beforehand. But I said, whatever you do, soak it all in and enjoy it. So I think that's the first thing, is that you get to big moments because you've earned it, and then you need to enjoy it. And generally, when people enjoy things, they play better. And I think the same would go into business. If you get to a pressure moment, the reason you're there is because you're doing things right, not because you're doing things wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that pressure moment to decide on. And so just remember, you're doing things right. The second thing is, if you're doing a big presentation or whatever it is, the people out there actually want you to succeed. They want to hear good stuff.
Absolutely.
You're there because you have something to give. Now, this is kind of a little different, but I say, don't be selfish and not give them of your experience and the benefit of your expertise because you're so nervous and think that, you have to do something special. You just need to go out there and give them what they want, which is to see what you've got and to learn from you. And I think that's also the same, in sport. At the end of the day, the crowd are there to be entertained. And therefore, they want to see you express yourself. They don't want to see you inhibited, because then they don't get to see the best of you. And that's what they're there for. So those are sort of ways that I'd prepare people for that. And the other thing I think you've alluded to is the habits that got them there. Is you've got here because you've consistently done the work. Now is a big moment for you to truly trust that work and find out, that it has been worthwhile, and the fact that you are ready for this moment. This moment is not here because you're not ready. This moment is here because you are ready. So yeah, I think that's, at the end of the day, as a coach, you can only try and influence thinking. The person will do what they're what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But if you can just change perspectives, that often is a big, big help. I remember Ivan Palmer before he went on, and he had qualified beautifully for Wimbledon. 3 very, very good matches, beat Max Mirny in the last round of qualies, and had to play Albert Costa, who was seeded 16 at the time and went on to win the French Open. Walking to the court, I literally saw the blood drain from his face. And I took him by the shoulders and I said, Arvin, listen to me. 5 sets is a long time. If you start terrible, don't panic. I promise you, at some point you'll find your game and you will play. Remember, 5 sets is a long time. Anyway, so he goes out there. I didn't anticipate how bad, but I mean, he was 6-love, 3-love down in 45 minutes. I mean, it went so fast, it was ridiculous. And then suddenly at love 15, he hit a great backhand return. And you just saw and from that moment, he played unbelievable and won in 4 sets. And when he came off, he said, all I was thinking during that horrible start is 5 sets is a long time. I'm going to play. But, I think, that was one of the best pieces of coaching I've done, which was really under pressure at the last minute. We were literally walking to the court.
Yeah.
And I noticed suddenly how he was feeling. But he was playing so well that if he could just relax and play, I knew that he had a very good chance.
I mean, it's very wise words, and I totally agree with everything you said there, Dave. And it shows the importance of the mind, doesn't it? And you've done all the hard work, as you say, whether it's in business, whether it's in sport, and I can totally relate to, like, in my early career and as a business exec, I was putting these companies on pedestals, these Shells of this world or Coca-Colas, and we'd won the work in, I was doing it, but we were a small team. And so it was just, in some of those instances, it was just me traveling down to London to present to sometimes the board of these companies. And I remember my dad saying to me, you're going in that room and they want you to win. You're speaking human to human.
Yeah.
Just because she's dealing with a big brand here, these are just people that want to understand. And also for the fact that, you're going in that room and no one knows more about this project or this subject than you do. You are the oracle because you've done all the hard work. And then it started to dissipate that fear, the fact that I was going to this global organization, speaking to boards of these companies, directing them on decisions they were going to make based on the research they commissioned. But I was confident with it because I knew, not only did we have quality data, but I'd done the legwork and therefore knew it. So, and they wanted to know that. They wanted the
yes.
Yeah, they didn't want me to fail on my feet there.
No.
So very wise advice. Right. Well, I'm a tennis nut, Dave. So some of my questions had to be specifically tennis. So second question, out of all your years in tennis, who's the best player you've ever seen play on tour and why?
I mean, I think I would have to answer this generationally because in every era you have a standout player who is amazing, and you can't really compare eras because my honest belief is a champion in one era would be a champion in another because by their nature they adapt, and whatever environment they're in, they would find a way to be a champion. I think certainly certain players stand out who I think, out of all those generations of champions, there would be champions of the champions if you could do that. What a fabulous if you could have a tournament of, everybody trained at the same era. But anyway, but if I go back, I think, it starts back with John Newcombe, somebody who played a style that I kind of copied, and obviously it was a totally different era, a lot of serve and volley and stuff, but just the way he conducted himself on court, and he was not the most talented player, but he was still able to, win, I think 6 Grand Slams, 2 or 3 Wimbledons, just with, grit, determination, and, a good, obviously a very, very good game. But I think, for somebody to become number one who wasn't the most gifted was something that I really admired. Bjorn Borg was the first real, superstar of tennis in terms of globally attracting, the mania that, like the Beatles in a way. And mentally, the admiration that I have for that, and maybe it's why he quit at 26, Because I mean, at 26, he had 11 slams. Who knows what
Yeah.
he could have gone on for? But he never said a word on court, and he never expressed himself positively or negatively on court. They called him the Iceman for that reason. But having played and been in tennis for so long, the fact that he never expressed himself positively was as big a achievement as not ever expressing himself negatively. Roger Federer, Sampras, guys that were modeled on the kind of Borg thing, could not help themselves but give the big fist pump and stuff like that at certain moments.
Yeah.
And he never did any of that. That was something that I really thought was phenomenal control. I mean, and management of nerves and emotions. It's never been seen before, and I don't think it'll ever be seen again. That just pure expressionless play from beginning to end. You can sometimes see in the eyes when he got pissed, But and then I think Sampras and Federer on grass were just both beautiful tennis players to watch. I loved again Agassi for his kind of street fighting, and the fact that he won the French Open without sliding is quite amazing.
Yeah.
He commanded the court so well from the center. He would have been a great squash player, just hold the tee.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think then we came to this unbelievable era of, the Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer, and obviously Andy Murray did what he did for British tennis. But the player that I think is redefining things now is Alcaraz.
Yeah.
All court, but he is bringing a joy to the game, showing a joy of the game. Nadal, you could see the enthusiasm and all the big, but not the smiling and laughing and just pure joy of playing. And I think I think so many players have felt like if they let their enjoyment show so much that it would affect their focus. But I think he's showing that no, actually it can really help him play even better tennis.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's
and
weird that,
then,
isn't it? Because I know when
yeah,
I played my squash, not to that level, but any sport, I bring humor into it, and I love, it's an enjoyment to play this. So I've always played with any sport with a smile on
yeah.
my face, and it's
Yeah, and I think I think it's meant to be, but the stakes are very high, and of course, everybody's looking for focus, and I think when people lose a few points and they're smiling and they're having a good time, they probably think, oh, I'm not there enough. Come on,
I need to
focus.
lock in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he's breaking that myth that you have to be locked in and kind of poker faced and that you can actually really 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 enjoy yourself. You'd always see moments with great players, but there were moments, and he's seems to just be open and express himself like that. And I mean, obviously what Djokovic has done is just phenomenal and continues to do. I mean, I did not see him beating Sinner or Alcaraz in a slam, and the fact that he beat one
Yeah.
at at his time of career is a phenomenal achievement. And it'll be interesting to see if that record can be broken. Obviously,
Yeah.
Alcaraz is on track at the moment, but there's a lot of winning to be done to get to 24. The crazy thing, Alcaraz has 7, at the age where Novak only had 1. So
Yeah.
Novak was a pretty slow starter. He did have Federer and Nadal to contend with, and Andy Murray. So it wasn't, and Stan Wawrinka as well.
Yeah.
So, it was a slightly slower start, but then obviously he became very prolific. But favorite player of all time, for me, I think I'd probably have to go Borg.
Right. Yeah. I never got to see Borg. I've seen a fair number of those players you've mentioned there. Obviously, Alcaraz at the moment. I've been lucky enough to see him live, and Sampras and Federer back in the day as well. Well, here we are speaking on the Monday after the Australian Open finals, aren't we? And yeah, those two. It was. I felt it was quite boring. I watched. I normally watch mainly men's tennis,
Yeah.
but actually there weren't that many good games until we got to the semis, and I
Yes.
think that's a lot's to be said as Zverev, isn't it? A lot of people don't realize that he's diabetic and how he does what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't know. So that was a hell of a game, Alcaraz and Zverev in the semis.
Yeah. I mean, I think, gut wrenching for Zverev. I mean, he's been close many times, and it's tough to serve for a match and lose it, especially after 5.5 hours. But I
I
mean,
think
he's shown
He didn't believe it, did he? You could see it in his eyes when he
Yeah.
stepped up.
Yeah, well, it's a very big moment, and I think it's in that moment where it comes down to total belief, because the guy on the other side is actually waiting for you to crack. In that moment, Alcaraz was waiting to see if he was going to crack, and the moment he couldn't put in a first serve and showed those signs, that really fuels the fire. It's like, okay, whereas if he cracks down an ace first point, you know
Yeah.
and looks like he, is going to win the game to love, that changes things. But it's easy to sit in an armchair and say, why hasn't he got his head together in that moment?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of scar tissue there. There's all things to contend with. If it was easy, they wouldn't get paid millions and millions of dollars to do it. It's very, very tough.
Well, building on that answer, Dave, I mean, we have been blessed, as you said, Rafa, Roger, Novak, Murray in the mix there. But now we've got this Alcaraz Sinner battle going on, and they really are dominating. I mean, I think is it Zverev's number 3 in the world, and he's nearer
Yeah.
to number 100 in terms of points than he is to Sinner, who's number 2. So, what's your thoughts around the good of the game between these two dominating? Really, when we had the 3 or 4, it was there was always others in the mix, whereas these two are just meeting in the final every time, it seems, apart from the Australian.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, tennis survives it, and yeah, you can have a period where they dominate, and it seems like there's nothing there, and it might get a little bit boring. I mean, the same happened with Michael Schumacher in motor racing, and Lewis Hamilton, I, Zhang Khan in squash. You remember him?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
But then
yeah,
I
yeah.
think his
I had his
expansion
video.
card came afterwards. So you'd have people that totally dominate the sport, and it seems like it's boring. But always someone else comes along, and we don't know who that is yet. Don't forget, Federer, Nadal, Novak, and Andy dominated for a long time,
Mm,
and it was like Dimitrov and a few others showed kind of signs. Songa, Monfils and that Verdasco, were they going to step up and challenge those guys, and weren't able to. And so for a long time, a couple of generations tried to catch them and couldn't. And there was some talk even then that it's, maybe a little bit boring that, those guys are always winning. The fact that there was, four, and Stan Wawrinka, don't forget him, 3
yeah,
finals, won all 3 in slams, were there. And I think because there's more of them and not just 2, but somebody will come along.
yeah,
We might have to wait 4 or 5 years for them to develop, but somebody will come along and challenge. And it's interesting because while they dominate, it's boring in one sense, but it's also very admirable in another. Because Federer had a period where he was unbeatable,
yeah,
and until Nadal kind of really, apart from the French, until Nadal started beating him on other surfaces, he was indomitable. And then obviously Novak started to come. But there was a little period of about 3 years or so where Federer was unbeatable. And
yeah,
and people said, oh, this is going to get boring. But somebody came along. So I mean, there might be, we've had 2 years kind of. Novak shook it up a little bit this tournament. I would say we probably got another at least 18 months, 2 years of those guys totally dominating. And then we'll see. But somebody will come along, and the sport always survives any
yeah,
kind of era. I remember, when you've had drug scandals in cycling, Tour de France, it'll be finished, nobody will, but it's still going strong. I mean, iconic events, iconic sports, they always survive what happens.
yeah. And my final question, I've been involved in tennis for a long time now with my sons. But why do you think British tennis, when you're looking, well, when I've looked at the juniors and then you're looking at, what the likes of who's dominating, Alcaraz, Spain, Sinner, Italy. Why do you think British tennis lags so far behind the likes of France, Spain, Italy? The States has got 6 times the population, but, those countries that are here on our doorstep that have got similar or less.
I think, first and foremost, I think the club structure. In Europe, clubs are often the center of the social hub of smaller towns, whether it's, hockey or tennis or whatever sport. They'll have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 hubs in a town of which, tennis often is a pretty big hub, where it is kind of like a social center. So people go down there, play tennis, they eat at the club, they shower, then they go out from the club. And I think, there are some clubs in Britain. I mean, you've got one, the Northern,
Yeah.
which is, more of a social thing and stuff. And if they have some kind of performance program, it's easy for kids to play and be around tennis a lot because it's a family thing. I played and worked for a Dutch club, the Metzelaars in The Hague. I mean, the weekends, just all day, families coming, going, or staying there all day and having lunch, having dinner. I mean, it was just like a big, big social center. And the kids would be hit against the wall. Then they go play. Then they play a bit of tennis. Then they go on their bikes around, and then they come back and play a bit more tennis. There are thousands of social hubs. So I think that's one thing where kids are just around tennis a lot. I think the second thing is tournament structure. Italy, France, Germany, Holland. There are so many tournaments and money tournaments for players to play. So you get a lot of players in those countries that are very good that actually don't play ATP tournaments, but they're a good 400 kind of level if they were playing, but they can make money playing for their clubs, playing money tournaments. And for young players, they have to battle through those guys. And if they can start winning local money tournaments, they know then that they're good enough to be doing pretty well on futures and have a very good start. And if I was looking at tennis as a business, how is it possible that you do not have a regional hub in all the main population centers?
Yeah.
A regional hub that makes it easy for players to get decent coaching for a reasonable price and have a center that's really based around performance, and that the best players can come and practice near to home.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say it just doesn't exist. And when you do have little hubs that are doing some decent stuff in performance, they're so cash starved, they can't do a really good job. They do an amazing job with no resources. And I would say that and we've been down that road before, and it's not these, super duper, in my opinion, academies where, you're suddenly spending 80 grand a kid and, you're narrowing it down to 8 kids or whatever. It's very difficult to pick who's going to come through. And if you had regional hubs, Manchester, Liverpool, how can they not have a regional hub? Newcastle, Bristol,
Birmingham, yeah.
Birmingham, where there is a central hub that has some finance behind it, where the better players can play together, and they're going to be, got some good coaches there. And to do that takes some money. But in the big scheme of the money that the LTA has, it's not a lot. It's not a lot, but it's all centralized into the one academy at Loughborough and the PSP program. And I'm not saying that those aren't good programs, but at the same time, there should be hubs all around the country in main conurbations.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Glasgow, Edinburgh. I mean, you have to travel so far all the time to get the right kind of practice.
Yeah.
And also, when you have things localized a little more, players should have the choice that they don't have to go to London, or they don't have to go, and can still have a chance to play. So my thing is, when we had the high performance centers, that was going down the right road. Just need to get the right people. And that's where you just got to pay a little bit more money to get the right person in charge of each center to make sure that the culture's right and everything like that. But it's not huge money in the big scheme of things, where it would just allow, because we don't have the club structure as in Europe to kind of fall back on somewhat. I think regional hubs would be a big way. And of course, the tournament structure, which is getting better in the UK again with the Pro Series and all these other things, but some of them are private ventures. which have spotted a gap in the market, which is great, and certainly helped players during COVID. The whole Pro Series stuff, and that really helped players in COVID. So yeah, those are the reasons, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I've traveled a lot in Europe and seen these small clubs that you talk about, and there's some fantastic places out there wherever you go in mainland Europe. So I definitely understand that side, Dave. I've lived through my son's career, the whole career of dealing with the LTA, and we've gone from, like you say, the regional development hubs, and how can we not have those in these major conurbations that we've got, and again, like you say, that the fact that they pick 8 to 12 people at the age of 12, how can they, it's a numbers game. How can they cherry pick the best players, throw 60 to 80 grand for them and stick with them, even if they're not performing all the way through? But I think.
But it's such a long journey. I mean, it would be also a disservice to those players if they didn't stick with them, because, players could go through terrible patches and can struggle. So, and I think, if you want to play that game and think that you can choose the best players and they'll come through, fine. But it should not only be that.
Yeah.
There's enough money in the pot to have something going on regionally. One thing with the clubs in the defense of the LTA is, in Europe, a lot of these clubs are on, municipal property, and the upkeep is done by the town. They're not all private clubs.
Yeah.
And that obviously allows those clubs to be cheaper and have more and better facilities and stuff, which the UK doesn't have that. But still, the answer to that to me would be regional hubs.
Yeah. Well, we could fill another hour's worth of discussion on this, Dave. Maybe that's something with your tennis and my business, and we'll try and change the LCA moving forward. But I think that's an impossible job. But I've loved interviewing you, Dave. I love being on your podcast. So thanks for the questions, and thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you very much. And I wish you luck with everything that you're doing. I appreciate your time. And I'm sure that your podcast will keep going from strength to strength.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching Locker Room Power with David Sammel. If you enjoyed the episode, hit subscribe and leave a comment on your favorite platform. See you in the next one.